The Zack Files. Just Add Water. And Scream. By Dan Greenburg, illustrated by Jack E. Davis. Chapter 1. Up until a few days ago, the only space alien I ever met was polite and well-behaved. So I stopped being afraid of space aliens, and I actually looked forward to meeting more of them. Then a visit to the Orville and Fanny Schlechtwasser Museum of Air and Space changed everything. Before we go into that, I'd better tell you who I am and stuff. My name is Zack. I'm 10 going on 11, and I'm in the 5th grade at the Horace Hyde White School for Boys. That's in New York City. My parents are divorced, and I spend about half my time with each of them. It's when I'm staying with my dad that all the weird stuff happens. Like the time I was going to tell you about. My friend Spencer and I were doing some research for a science project on astronauts. Our science teacher, Mrs. Coleman Levin, was planning to take our class to Washington, D.C., so we could visit the National Air and Space Museum, part of the Smithsonian Institution. But that wasn't for another month or so. In the meantime, one Saturday, Spencer and I decided to start our research at the museum in New York. The Orville and Fanny Schlechtwasser Museum of Air and Space is on West 99H Street, on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. It's in the basement of an old brownstone, in the apartment of Orville and Fanny Schlechtwasser. Mr. Schlechtwasser was the former janitor at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington. Almost all the exhibits in the Schlechtwasser Museum are ones the Smithsonian in Washington didn't want. For example, they have used Apollo astronaut handkerchiefs with real astronaut boogers. They have discarded Russian cosmonaut underpants from the Soyuz space station. The Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Washington has a Mercury space capsule that came back from outer space. The Schlechtwasser has mercury from a broken astronaut thermometer. The Smithsonian has the actual centrifuge machine that whirls astronaut trainees around and around until they vomit. The Schlechtwasser has a bucket of actual astronaut trainee vomit. The Smithsonian has a spacesuit worn by Neil Armstrong when he first walked on the moon. The Schlechtwasser has a t-shirt worn by Neil Armstrong's nephew after his uncle came back. It says my uncle walked on the moon, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt. Spencer and I were kind of disappointed in the Schlechtwasser Museum, but we didn't want to hurt the feelings of Mr. and Mrs. Schlechtwasser. So how did you like it? Asked Mrs. Schlechtwasser. She was about 4.5 feet tall, and about 4.5 feet wide. I liked it a lot, I said. What did you like in particular? Asked Mr. Schlechtwasser. He was about 6'7" and about 2 feet wide. He had an Adam's apple the size of a nectarine. The, Apollo handkerchiefs would have to be my favorites, I said. Oh, those are real honeys, he said. By the way, those are genuine astronaut boogers. Did you know that? Yes, I did, I said. That's what the sign said. He turned to Spencer. And you, son, he said. What was your favorite? I guess mine would have to be the, cosmonaut underpants, sir, said Spencer. Aren't they beauties? Said Mr. Schlechtwasser. They're made out of fur, because of the cold winters they have in Russia. And in space, of course. Well, we'd better be on our way, said. We don't want to miss our subway. Don't the subways pretty much run one right after the other? Asked Mrs. Schlechtwasser. Pretty much, I said. Then before you go, you have time to stop in our lovely gift shop, said Mrs. Schlechtwasser. I looked at Spencer. He shrugged. I really didn't have the heart to say no to her. Sure, I said. The Schlechtwasser Air and Space Museum gift shop wasn't any better than the museum. Spencer bought a t-shirt that said my uncle went to the Orville and Fanny Schlechtwasser Air and Space Museum, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt. I bought some foil packets of freeze-dried astronaut food, some sausage and pepperoni pizza, some strawberry ice cream, some s'mores. At least I thought that was what I bought. What I actually bought almost ended life on Earth as we know it. Chapter 2. By the time Spencer and I got back to Dad's apartment it was almost 4 p.m. I'm hungry, said Spencer. You got anything to eat? We went into the kitchen. On the kitchen table was my laptop computer. I had left it on, but I always do that. I went to the refrigerator aerator, opened the door, and looked inside. There was half of a 3-day-old mushroom pizza. There were 2 bananas that had gone completely brown. There were a few slices of bread that were so stale, mold was growing on them. There was an almost empty carton of sour milk. There was half a bottle of flat Dr. Pepper. The smell coming from inside the refrigerator was pretty gross. It smelled like a small animal had died in there. I don't think Dad has gone shopping in a while, I said. I'm going to leave the refrigerator door open a while to air it out. Why don't we try some of that astronaut food? We took out the foil packets of astronaut food we bought at the Schlechtwasser Air and Space Museum and looked them over. One packet was labeled freeze-dried pepperoni and sausage pizza. I tore open the packet and poured it into a bowl. I carried it over to the kitchen sink and added some water. I mixed it up and tasted it. What does it taste like? Spencer asked. Cardboard, I said. Pepperoni and sausage flavored cardboard. Yuck, said Spencer. Let's try another one. Spencer opened a packet labeled freeze-dried strawberry ice cream. He poured it into another bowl, added water, and tasted. Well? I said. Soap, he said. It tastes like strawberry-flavored soap. Yum, I said. My turn. I took out a packet labeled freeze-dried s'mores. Whenever we have campfires, I love making s'mores by melting chocolate, graham crackers and marshmallows together. I wondered how the freeze-dried ones would taste, and then I took a closer look at the packet. Oh, rats, I said. I didn't get s'mores, I got spores. I showed Spencer the packet. Look, Spencer. It says spores from Mars. What do you suppose that means? In case I haven't mentioned it, Spencer is the smartest kid in our grade. Probably the smartest kid in the Horace Hyde-White School. Probably the smartest kid in the whole entire state of New York. His IQ is around 1,000, I think. Spores are kind of like seeds, said Spencer. They reproduce a lot like seeds. And they're able to survive under lots worse conditions than most seeds. What kind of conditions? I said. Like a trip from Mars? Spores probably could survive a trip from Mars, yeah, said Spencer. I said. Hey, Spencer, do you think these things really came from Mars? Spencer shrugged. Who knows, he said. Maybe they came back on the Mariner probe. Mariner never came back from Mars, I said. Mariner was an unmanned probe designed to stay on Mars. You're right, said Spencer. His face turned red. I had just shown I knew something that the smartest kid in school hadn't known. I felt pretty proud of myself. Let's pour this stuff out and see what happens, I said. I tore open the packet. I poured the spores into another bowl. They looked kind of like seeds, all right. Except weirder. Each spore had 2 little dark spots on it, like eyes. It was almost as if they were staring at me. That really creeped me out. Go ahead, said Spencer. Add water. Okay, I said. Staring at the spores, I carried the bowl toward the sink. I turned on the faucet and added water. The instant the water hit the spores, I heard a weird hissing sound. Then, and I swear this is the truth, I thought I heard them burp. I screamed. The bowl flew out of my hands. I caught it before it hit the floor and broke, but wet spore blobs landed everywhere. Some splattered inside the open refrigerator. Some landed on my computer. Some fell on the floor. I got a dish rag and tried to mop up what I could. I looked at what was left in the bowl. The spores were bubbling now and sticking together to form a pulsing, jelly-like mass. And they were definitely burping. Spencer came over and looked in the bowl. Fascinating, he said. The spores seemed to be growing at a really amazing rate. It was true. When I poured them in the bowl, they filled only about an eighth of it. And after spilling some, there was even less. But now the bowl was almost half full. The blobby stuff was rising higher and higher. "Hey, Zack," said Spencer. "Check out the refrigerator." I looked inside the refrigerator. The pizza was almost gone. So were the brown bananas. So was the moldy bread. The carton of milk was empty. Where did all that junk go? I asked. The spore globs were spreading on the fridge shelves and climbing up the fridge walls. "Hey, Spencer, you don't think the spores ate that junky food, do you?" Spencer looked in the fridge, looked at me, and nodded. I gulped. "This is really creepy," I said. "You're not kidding," said Spencer. Then we heard a weird noise. It came from my computer. I walked over and looked at it. Blobby spore stuff had seeped into my keyboard. There was a message on the screen in the biggest letters I had ever seen. Here's what it said: "Human boys, feed US. Human boys, we need much food now." Chapter 3. "Spencer," I said, "did you do this?" "Did I do what?" "Write this on my screen while I wasn't looking?" "No way," said Spencer. He looked really scared. I hooked up the audio on my computer. "Who is speaking to us on my computer?" I asked. The computer made a kind of crackling sound. Then I heard a strange, metallic voice: "Human boys, feed US. Human boys, we need much food now." "Who is speaking to us on my computer?" I asked again. The computer made more crackling sounds. Then we heard the strange, metallic voice again: "We are spores. Spores from Mars." That really creeped me out. "Mars?" I whispered. "Spencer, how did spores get here from Mars?" But Spencer was so scared, all he could do was stare at the computer. "What do you want from us?" I asked. "Food. We need more food. We need it now." "Well, that's all the food we have," I said. "My dad needs to go shopping." "What is a dad?" "Perhaps we can eat a dad." "You can't eat my dad," I said. I turned to Spencer. "What should we do here?" "I think this is getting out of hand." I looked at the fridge. Blobby stuff had dripped down and was spreading all over the kitchen floor. "You must get US more food. You must also do something else for US now," said the metallic voice. "What would you like us to do?" Spencer asked. "Go back to Space Museum. Buy more spores. Free them by adding water." "Why do you want us to free more spores?" Spencer asked. "Martian spores love to come to Earth, do tourist things." "What kind of tourist things?" I asked. "See Disney World. Eat Whoppers at Burger King. Go to Nike Town and eat cross-training shoes. Maybe take over the planet Earth, eat humans." Oops, forget that. Meant to say maybe take plants and plant in Earth, meet humans. So spores plan to take over Earth and kill humans? Spencer asked. Oh, no, not kill humans, never kill humans. Just, give them other jobs. Other jobs? I said. What kind of other jobs? Good jobs, fun jobs. Like what? I asked. Oh, jobs like being footstools or coffee tables. Really? Said Spencer. Well, for your information, human beings aren't interested in being either footstools or coffee tables for a bunch of stupid Martian spores. If human boys not follow orders, or if human boys tell anybody about spores, then bad things will happen to human boys. Spencer and I exchanged nervous looks. What kind of bad things? Very bad things. Don't ask. Okay, I said. No problem. We'll go and buy more spores. Then I winked at Spencer so he'd know I didn't mean it. Well, it's back to the old Schlechtwasser Museum for us. Let's get going. Chapter 4. When we walked into the Orville and Fanny Schlechtwasser Air and Space Museum, the Schlechtwassers seemed surprised to see us back so soon. Well, hello there, boys, said Mrs. Schlechtwasser. How have you been? Frankly, not all that good, I said. We need to speak to you about those Martian spores we bought from you. The Schlechtwassers looked nervous. What about them? Said Mr. Schlechtwasser. Well, they were freeze-dried, so we added water, said Spencer. Then they turned into this disgusting blob that keeps growing and multiplying into more blobs. They started eating everything in sight. They ordered us to come back here and buy more freeze-dried spores, I said. They told us if we didn't, bad things would happen to us. Do you know anything about this? Mr. and Mrs. Schlechtwasser looked at each other. No, said Mr. Schlechtwasser. No, said Mrs. Schlechtwasser. You look like you do know, said Spencer. We just don't want any trouble, said Mr. Schlechtwasser. We just want to be left alone, said Mrs. Schlechtwasser. The spores plan to take over planet Earth, I said. Well, they wouldn't be the first, said Mr. Schlechtwasser. I sighed. It didn't seem as though the Schlechtwassers were going to be much help. Isn't there anything you can tell us to help us? I asked. Do what they say, said Mrs. Schlechtwasser. They're not kidding around. Mr. Schlechtwasser motioned to us to move closer. We did. You didn't hear this from us, he whispered, but if you turn a hairdryer on them, it might kill them.